Why did we stop using salt to clear weeds from driveways and pavement cracks? Roman armies salted enemy fields to ensure nothing would grow for generations. The same chemistry works on the weeds splitting your patio stones right now. A solution of 3 parts water to 1 part table salt kills weeds within days through a process called osmosis. The herbicide industry replaced a $1 kitchen ingredient with a $40 chemical bottle. Why? 2 things explain why almost nobody in the modern garden world reaches for salt when weeds appear in their driveway cracks. One involves the chemistry of what salt actually does to a plant at the cellular level, which most gardeners have never been taught and which the herbicide industry has no particular interest in explaining. The other involves who profits every time you buy a bottle of synthetic herbicide instead of walking to your kitchen cabinet. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how salt kills weeds, why Roman armies used it as a weapon of agricultural destruction capable of ending civilizations, where you can safely use it in your own yard without damaging the soil you want to grow in, and why the herbicide industry has spent decades selling you a $40 bottle of chemicals. To do what a $1 bag of table salt has been doing since before the Roman Empire existed, the place to start is not with the salt. It is with the plant. Every plant on Earth, from the dandelion cracking your driveway to the oak tree at the end of the street, depends on the same fundamental biological process to stay alive. Water moves from the surrounding soil into the plant's root cells through a membrane. That movement happens because the concentration of dissolved substances inside the root cells is higher than in the soil water outside them, and water naturally flows from areas of lower concentration toward areas of higher concentration to balance itself out. This process is called osmosis, and without it, no plant survives. Roots cannot absorb nutrients. Cells cannot maintain their pressure and structure. Leaves cannot stay rigid. The plant wilts, dries, and dies. The same process operates at every level of the plant, not just the roots. When water moves through the osmotic process into root cells, it creates pressure that pushes water up through the stem and into the leaves. That pressure, called turgor pressure, is what keeps leaves from drooping, what keeps stems upright, what allows a plant to hold itself above the soil and reach for light. Remove osmosis, and you remove turgor pressure. Within hours, the plant collapses inward. Leaves curl, stems bend. The visible signs of wilting that you see after spraying a weed with salt solution are not the plant dying. They are the plant losing the internal water pressure that was holding it upright. The death follows over the next day or two as the cells, deprived of the water they need for every metabolic process, cease to function. Salt disrupts this process completely and immediately. When you apply a salt solution to soil or directly to plant tissue, you change the concentration equation that osmosis depends on. Suddenly, the concentration of dissolved substances outside the plant is higher than inside its cells. Water stops flowing in. It starts flowing out. The same membrane that was drawing moisture in through osmosis now runs in reverse, pulling water out of the plant cells into the salty environment surrounding them. Leaves wilt within hours. The plant begins to desiccate from the inside out. Without access to the water it needs for every biological function, it dies. The mechanism is simple, universal, and has not changed since the first plant root encountered the first concentrated salt deposit. Millions of years before humans existed, every weed growing in your driveway crack is running the same cellular process as every crop plant in every field that Roman armies destroyed. The biology is identical. The vulnerability is identical. The outcome of disrupting it with salt is identical. What changes is only the scale of application and the purpose of the person doing the applying. This is why Roman armies, in their most decisive acts of conquest, did not stop at burning enemy crops. They salted the earth. Historical accounts of the destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE describe Roman forces sowing salt into the soil of the defeated city to ensure that nothing would grow on that ground for generations. Whether every detail of those accounts is literally accurate or partially mythologized by later historians, the agricultural principle they describe is real. Salt applied to soil in sufficient concentration does exactly what the stories say. It sterilizes, it persists, it keeps the ground barren for months or years until enough rainfall dilutes and washes the sodium from the affected area. An enemy whose fields are salted cannot plant. An enemy who cannot plant cannot feed an army. The Romans understood that destroying an enemy's ability to grow food was as decisive as destroying their military capacity, and salt was the most reliable tool available for that purpose. Stay with me, because understanding the Roman use of salt as a weapon of agricultural destruction is the key to understanding why the same mineral is so powerful on your driveway weeds. The Roman military understood something that modern gardeners have largely forgotten. Salt is not a poison in the conventional sense. It does not kill plants by introducing a toxic compound that disrupts a specific biological pathway the way synthetic herbicides do. It kills plants by removing the one thing every living cell depends on: water. It does this through pure chemistry, the same chemistry that has governed how water moves through biological membranes since the first living cell appeared on Earth. No plant has evolved resistance to osmosis. No weed develops immunity to dehydration. Salt works on every plant it contacts at sufficient concentration, which is exactly why it was the most reliable agricultural weapon available to any civilization that understood how to use it. The ancient world knew this well before Rome. There are references to salt being used against enemy agriculture in Mesopotamian texts dating back well before the Roman period. Medieval European farmers used salt against specific weeds in targeted applications, a practice documented in agricultural manuscripts from the period. Gardening guides from the 18th and 19th centuries reference salt as a standard recommendation for clearing weeds from garden paths and gravel walkways, placed alongside advice on companion planting and crop rotation as practical, well-understood knowledge that any gardener was expected to possess. Every culture that produced salt in sufficient quantity understood that spreading it on ground where you did not want plants to grow was effective and lasting. The knowledge was so widespread and so taken for granted that it rarely required much explanation. You salt your paths to clear weeds the same way you salt your food to preserve it. The chemistry is different in its specifics, but the underlying principle that salt does something powerful to biological material was understood empirically by anyone who worked with it regularly. What the ancient world understood through observation and practice, modern biology confirms through cellular membrane physiology and osmotic pressure calculations. The mechanism was real long before anyone had the tools to explain why. Here is where modern horticulture and the herbicide industry diverge from everything traditional farming understood. A bottle of commercial weed killer Roundup, or any of the dozens of similar glyphosate-based or alternative synthetic herbicide products available at every garden center, costs between $20 and $50 depending on the brand and the size of the container. It requires careful handling. It carries warning labels about skin and eye contact. Its active chemical compounds have been the subject of ongoing scientific and legal debate about environmental persistence, long-term biological effects, and potential health impacts that have resulted in major litigation against their manufacturers. It kills weeds effectively, and it needs to be repurchased when the bottle runs out, which is the design feature that matters most to the industry selling it. Table salt costs roughly $1 for a kilogram bag. It has been in continuous kitchen and agricultural use for thousands of years. It requires no warning label beyond the practical advice that it should not be used in areas where you want other plants to grow. It is already in your kitchen right now. It requires no trip to the garden center, no reading of a safety data sheet, no protective equipment, and no careful disposal when the bag is empty, because the bag dissolves in your sink. The herbicide industry never had a particular incentive to remind you that salt existed. It cannot be patented. It cannot be branded. It cannot generate the kind of recurring revenue that a $40 bottle of proprietary chemical formula generates from a customer who needs to buy a new one every season. The knowledge that salt kills weeds was not suppressed deliberately through any organized campaign. It simply became commercially irrelevant the moment the chemical industry had a more profitable alternative to offer. And without commercial incentive to keep the information in circulation through advertising and retail placement, it faded from the mainstream gardening conversation within a generation or two. Your grandmother knew about salt and weeds. Her grandmother definitely knew. The knowledge gap opened in the generation that grew up with herbicide bottles on garden center shelves and assumed that the shelf product was the correct answer to every weed problem. Here is exactly how to use it, and the critical warning that every honest guide on this subject must include. Salt is a non-selective weed killer. Non-selective means it kills any plant it contacts in sufficient concentration, without distinguishing between a weed you want dead and a garden plant you want to keep. This property is precisely what makes it so effective on pavement weeds and precisely what makes it dangerous near any soil where you want plants to grow. Salt does not degrade in soil the way some organic compounds break down. It is diluted and moved by rainfall, but slowly, applied in a garden bed to a lawn or near the root zone of trees or shrubs. Salt can sterilize the soil for months or years, killing not just the target weeds, but every plant in the affected area, and potentially rendering the soil unsuitable for replanting for a long period. This limitation is important enough to state clearly before anything else. Salt is the right tool for paved surfaces and compacted hardstand areas. It is the wrong tool for anywhere you want to grow anything now or in the future. Use it accordingly, and it is highly effective and almost free. Use it in the wrong place, and you have created a problem that may take years of heavy rainfall to correct. Use salt exclusively on hard surfaces where nothing is supposed to grow. Driveway cracks, patio pavers, concrete sidewalk joints, gravel paths where all vegetation is unwanted. Fence line edges where the weeds grow in compacted, hard-packed ground with no garden soil nearby. Stone walls where weeds push through the mortar. In these locations, salt is an appropriate, effective, and nearly free solution to a persistent problem. In these locations, the fact that salt sterilizes the area is a feature rather than a problem, because you want nothing to grow there anyway. The Romans understood this principle when they applied it to enemy farmland. The distinction between the Roman army's purpose and yours is only that they wanted barren soil everywhere, and you want it only in specific places. The application method is simple and requires no equipment beyond a container and a spray bottle. Dissolve 1 cup of table salt in 3 cups of water. Plain sodium chloride works correctly for this purpose. This is standard table salt, kosher salt, or rock salt, any product whose primary ingredient is sodium chloride. Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate rather than sodium chloride, does not function as a herbicide and should never be substituted for this purpose. Magnesium sulfate is actually used as a plant fertilizer in some contexts, which is the exact opposite of what you want when trying to kill weeds. The 3-to-1 water-to-salt ratio creates a concentration high enough to trigger osmotic reversal in most common weed species. Within a short period of exposure, spray or pour the solution directly on the weeds you want to kill, making sure to wet the leaves and stems thoroughly. For weeds growing in pavement cracks, applying directly into the cracks so the solution reaches the root zone increases effectiveness significantly. Since you want the osmotic disruption to reach the root cells, rather than only the visible above-ground portion of the plant, leaves begin to wilt within hours of application. Most annual weed species, annual meadowgrass, hairy bittercress, shepherd's purse, chickweed, die within 2 to 4 days. Perennial weeds with deep taproots may require a second application targeting the root zone after the initial top growth has died back. If you want faster results on leaf tissue, adding white vinegar to the salt solution significantly increases effectiveness on above-ground plant growth. Acetic acid, the active component in white vinegar, damages the waxy cuticle on plant leaves, allowing the salt solution to penetrate more rapidly into the leaf cells and accelerating the osmotic disruption. A mixture of 1 cup of salt dissolved in 1 gallon of white vinegar with a small squeeze of dish soap to help the solution adhere to leaf surfaces rather than beating off, produces a formula that is visibly effective on most weed species within hours rather than days. The dish soap acts as a surfactant, breaking the surface tension of the liquid and helping it coat the leaves rather than running off. This combined solution is more aggressive than salt water alone and should be applied with even more care to avoid contact with any nearby plants you want to keep. For very stubborn weeds in completely paved areas, with no nearby soil, dry salt applied directly into a pavement crack and then moistened with a small amount of water creates a highly concentrated solution in the immediate root zone. Research measuring phytotoxicity found that 49 grams of granular salt per square meter causes severe plant death in common weed species, including swordgrass, for a driveway crack treatment covering 2 to 3 inches of crack width. A small pinch of salt is genuinely sufficient to achieve this concentration in the confined root space. You do not need much. The cracks are small. The root zone is limited. A little salt goes a long way. One honest note about limitations: salt effectively kills annual weed species and suppresses the above-ground growth of perennials. Deeply rooted perennial weeds with extensive underground root systems, bindweed, ground, elder, horsetail, creeping thistle, are more difficult to eliminate permanently. With any surface-applied treatment, including commercial herbicide, these species store energy in root systems that extend well below the surface application zone and generate new top growth from those reserves. After the above-ground portion dies, salt applied to pavement cracks significantly slows and suppresses these species. But complete permanent elimination of deeply rooted perennials in hard surfaces typically requires repeated treatment over multiple growing seasons, regardless of whether the treatment is salt or synthetic herbicide. The difference is that the repeated salt treatments cost almost nothing, create no chemical runoff concerns, and require no protective equipment or careful container disposal. Your driveway weeds have been splitting the pavement and filling the cracks all season. You either ignore them, pull them by hand on your knees in the summer heat, or buy a bottle from the store and read the label and wear gloves. And avoid the garden for the recommended waiting period and then buy another bottle next year when the weeds come back. There is a fourth option that Roman soldiers knew, that medieval farmers practiced, that your grandmother used. Before the chemical industry arrived, with a branded label and a $40 price point, and an assumption that you had forgotten what your kitchen cabinet already contained. Salt, $1. 3 parts water, 1 part salt. Spray it on the driveway cracks, the patio pavers, the sidewalk joints where the weeds push up every spring. The weeds wilt within hours and die within days. The herbicide company sells nothing. The chemistry that accomplished the result has not changed since the first Roman soldier walked through a conquered field and understood that nothing would grow. There again for a generation. The chemistry is the same as it was when Roman armies used it to end civilizations. The price is the same as it has always been. The weeds in your driveway are exactly as vulnerable to it as the fields of Carthage were in 146 BCE. The only thing that changed is that a generation learned to reach for a $40 bottle instead of a $1 bag. And nobody in a position to profit from that change had any reason to remind you that the older answer still worked. Nobody sold salt into that knowledge gap. They sold herbicide into it instead. The two products produce the same dead weeds. One generates recurring revenue. The other costs $1 and lasts until the bag is empty. If you found this genuinely useful, watch the next video and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next one.